Start recording. Hello everyone and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code a complete game live on stream. We are back after quite some hiatus. I was away in San Francisco working on doing some optimization on The Witness, and then of course we had Handmade Con, and yesterday I wanted to give my voice a chance to recover before doing the stream because we were out till like 2 a.m. or something after Handmade Con. I went to the bar with that people were having sort of the informal after party at. I don't know, there was probably like 30 or 40 people there from Handmade Con, so we were chatting pretty late and my voice was dead by the end of it. I was pretty hoarse on Sunday. But yeah, so we are back now, and I don't know, for those of you who are maybe not, who don't follow us on mollyrocket.com, you may have seen this post. If you do follow us. If you don't follow us, you may have missed it. Basically, there is a art pack for Handmade Hero that went up, and you should have received an email notification about it. If you didn't, it doesn't really matter, because as long as you have your download page where you download the code every night, and even if you don't, you can go to this lost download thing here and do the have it resent thing. If you go to that send out page, there's now an art pack, and you're going to need the art pack for a lot of the stuff that we're going to be doing on the stream going forwards. And this is the first art pack. There'll be more. And what these art packs actually are is they're essentially like art that Yangson's been working on that I've packaged up into the format that we all designed on the stream, so that we can essentially plug them into the game and start using actual artwork that we want to use. So if you haven't already downloaded that art pack, it's pretty big. I think it's like 100 megs or something like that. You're going to want to download that, get that downloading. And I've actually got it here. I obviously downloaded it. I've got it here on my machine. So I'm going to go ahead and grab it. It'll be a little zip file here. There it is, 108 megabytes compressed. And so if I go in here and I open up my Handmade Hero directory, right, you can see that I've got in the data directory, we've got these HHAs. Remember, they're the things that we made to test out our system. And what's in this intro art, as you can see, is it's one of those packaged HHAs, right? So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to unzip this into this directory so that now I've got the HHA that we distributed. That's the art pack. And you can see once I decompress, it's pretty big. It's about half a gig, right? So that's just a bunch of art from Yangchen that I've packed up in there. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit about that and just kind of show you what's in there and discuss what we're going to do with it so that you can kind of have a little bit of perspective on what's going on there. Okay, so it's our first day back. We were right in the middle of doing some debug code. I'm going to put that to aside for just 1 second so we can talk about this stuff. And the reason for that is like we've been away for so long now, I don't feel like there's any particular need for continuity because we've been away so long that anything that you were thinking about, you've definitely paged out at this point. I know I certainly have. And so what I want to do is just kind of talk about this art pack since it's out here now, and I want to get it in and just kind of show you how to work with it, especially if people want to play around with it on their own, just so they know what's going on. All right, so now, if you remember correctly, I'm going to go ahead and build our game and just run it here. If you remember correctly, HHAs are automatically loaded by our game engine, right? So when we run the game, it's going to automatically it's going to automatically load that HHA because it's in the data directory, right? And it's going to automatically load them all. So basically what happens is that HHA gets picked up just automatically. We don't have to add any code for it to already load it and consider it active and all the things in it active, right? But what I had to do, obviously, when I made the data pack is it's got stuff in it that we hadn't named yet. And if you remember the way that we kind of name things in our asset system, right? I think it's in file format.h. Is we've got sort of these asset tags and we've got these asset types, right? And the asset tags and the asset types are things that we use to identify assets in the game so that we can load them. And so what I had to do is I had to add new assets types in order to say like what things were that I was packing. And basically what I did is I added asset like opening cutscene, right? Which is a place that we store sort of information that it goes with our opening cutscene. And also, similar to that, I added a tag shot index and a tag layer index, right? And so what these were, the way I decided to do it, let me just give you a little bit of an idea on how the breakdown worked here, is what I did is I said, well, okay, here's day 221, is I said, okay, you know, this is supposed to be a real game, right? Like I said, professional quality game. Professional quality games have cutscenes in them, right? A little intro cutscene to kind of like set the mood or whatever, or that plays during the attract mode before you start playing the game. So we're gonna have one of those, and that seems like the most logical thing to put into the game first, because in terms of programming, it kind of gives us a way to kind of get our feet wet, right? Because it kind of gives us a way to do some very simple animation work before we try to start doing the harder core animation stuff, which is like when, you know, entities in the game are actually like interacting with other entities. There's a lot more logic there. It's not a pre-scripted thing, right? So a cutscene is usually easier, at least in a 2D game certainly. It's usually easier to code the stuff that's necessary to support a cutscene than it is to code the stuff that's necessary to support the in-game interactions, which are all going to be certainly more dynamic and less predictable and all that sort of thing, right? So I started with the cutscenes because that I thought would be the easiest thing for us to program, and then we'll kind of move on from there. So the art packs will kind of be like cutscenes first, and then you know, entities and scenery coming in future packs. So this is like the cutscene art. And the cutscene art is structured in the following fashion. Like any cutscene, there's a series of shots. So essentially we have the notion that there's like, you know, shot 1, shot 2, shot 3, and so on, up to shot n, right, which is the last shot. And these are essentially like things that we'll be showing on the screen. You could imagine them as little, you know, pictures that we're going to show on the screen for part of our cutscene. And normally, maybe, you know, if all we wanted to do was just show a still image, like, you know, here's the little handmade hero guy, and he's got his little glove there, and he's like, let's do this, right? If we wanted to do something like that, then we would just have a single bitmap, and we just put it on the screen, and we'd be done, right? But that's kind of lame, so what I wanted to do was do a little bit more of an interesting style for the cutscene, which is to say I wanted to have multiple layers that kind of did like a little bit of a parallax thing, right? And so what I did is I had Yangshan draw it so that basically each shot consists of a series of layers, right? So for shot 1, we've actually got like layer 1, layer 2, you know, layer 3. And these are designed to be composite on top of each other, so, you know, if you've got this sort of a thing, maybe the handmade hero guy is in the front, maybe then there's like the orphanage in the back, and then maybe there's some like hills or something. And that way we can kind of have a slow sort of zoom pan effect happening, where you get a little bit of nice parallax in there, you get a little bit of nice depth to the image, right? And it really just makes the cutscene look a lot more professional and interesting as compared to just sticking a single, you know, image up on the screen, which isn't really going to look like at the quality level that we might like to have for a professional game, right? Just looks kind of amateur, in my opinion. So you should be able to know how to program something like this, so that's the way I made it. And so what I did was I said, okay, all of our assets that are involved in the opening cutscene will just get asset opening cutscene as their asset category, and then they'll be tagged with two things. One will be the shot index and one will be the layer index. And so basically what you could do is you can pull out any given shot and layer by just saying I would like the best match for opening cutscene for this shot, this layer, and it'll give you back that one, and off you go. So, the reason we asserted in here, right, like when I ran it the first time, is because our asset count is actually going to be higher than the allowed number, right? The allowed number is just going to be whatever we said before, and I inserted a new one, so that's going to hit the assertion and say, hey, wait a minute, there's more than there's supposed to be than what I understand, like what's going on, right? So if I recompile it now, we should be fine, and now you can see that our game is running as we would expect it to run, like it was before. And now we're loading that HHA up. Now remember, we do all of our loading on demand, and so that HHA, it's not actually loading half a gigabyte of data, especially on a system like this, which is running on a conventional hard drive, 7200 RPM hard drive, not a modern solid-state drive with fast transfer speeds. There's no way it would have loaded 500 megabytes in an instant, right? You can see when I run this, it's instant, right? And it starts up immediately. It couldn't do that. And so again, it's not, I just want to reinforce that it's not actually loading the HSA, it's just loading the header of the HHA, and so that it knows what assets are in it, And it's doing the merge with the other HHA, so it has a single asset table that it can use, but it's not actually loading it. It won't load the actual bitmap data till we go to try and use it. Now, that's exactly what I'd like to do now. For the rest of the stream, I'd like to try just loading in some of that data, show you what's in there, and what I mean by that multi-layered stuff. So we'll try to get a little bit of that working on the stream today. So if I go to handmade.cpp, the first thing I want to check is I don't remember what kind of asset workspace we're starting in right now. So when we do, create game assets or whatever it is, if you remember, like we kind of have a little asset manager system thing here that takes care of our asset loading for us. This function right here that we pass it how much we expect it to be able to use for storing those assets. And if you take a look, what we did is we set that number to 16, and that's pretty good for testing, and we probably want to do that because we probably have bugs in our asset system. So in the future, we're going to want to test that at a low number, certainly, just to bulletproof it a little bit. But at the moment, that is much too low, because if we're at 1080p, I just want to, again, get you in the habit of doing some of this math and thinking about it this way. If we're at 1080p, right, which is where I wanted Yangshan to target. So we kind of, when we did the art, we made sure they would be good at 1080p. So if you have 1080p, that's a 1920 by 1080 screen, right? And of course, it's going to be RGB and alpha channel, so it's 4 bytes per pixel. That means every one of these layers could potentially be at least that big. And if it's got some bleed, if it's got some ability to like pan, it could be even bigger than that, right? But just to give you a little perspective on that, 1920 by 1080 times 4, take a look at that number, right? That's actually 8 megabytes right there. And so with 16 megabytes, we wouldn't even be able to load in probably one cutscene. It wouldn't even be able to load a single frame, because there isn't even enough memory there to load in just a set of layers. So we really do need this to be something more like a working set of, like, something more reasonable. It could be more like that, right? That's certainly plenty, because if you do 250 divided by 8, that's 32 cutscene layers. You could probably get by with that. We might want more, but you get the idea, right? So if that's what we're doing with our game assets, that gives us a little bit more leeway. That wouldn't change anything in the running here. It just means that now the asset system won't have to thrash, right? And like I said, we will want to set that down to lower numbers. It will expose bugs in our asset system because we haven't really tested the asset system yet. So we will want to do stuff like that, but this just now is not the appropriate time for it while we're working on another system. We can assume that the asset system works properly for now, even though we know we probably want to do some heavier testing on it to actually get the bugs out of it. But we don't care about that. We just care that the interface is what it is, and so that we can write other stuff to it. So we've upgraded that a little bit, and that's all good. But now we want to do some of this cutscene coding. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and just make a little handmade cutscene file, just because this is stuff that really isn't going to affect anything else in the game. And so I'm just going to kind of stick it over here so it doesn't get in my way when I'm doing stuff. Again, a lot of people ask me stuff about how you divide stuff into files, and the answer is it's just your own personal convenience. I always compile everything into one single translation unit anyway, or if I have to, I break it up into 2 or 3 if I absolutely have to. But in general, everything's one translation unit, and so files are all mushed together at the end anyway. So really, this is just because I just don't want this stuff clogging up my the rest of my code. I'm just going to squirrel it away here. So what we're going to do is, again, I'm not going to try to overcomplicate this at the start. I'm going to start as if I've never written a cutscene before. I'm just going to go with the basics, and then I'll show you as we go some things that we're going to kind of want to start pulling out of it. Again, compression-oriented programming approach there. Just some things we want to start pulling out of it to make it easier on ourselves to write these sorts of things. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is the absolute most basic thing we could possibly want to do, which is just take the first shot and render all the layers. Right? That's it. That's all I want to do. And so what I'd like to start with is say, okay, let's go ahead in here and do like just render cutscene or something. I don't even know what it's going to be called. And then we're just going to go ahead and do the same kind of rendering that we've been doing everywhere else, right? You can kind of see this sort of stuff happening here, right? All the sort of things we were doing. So what we're going to want to do is basically set up everything for the cutscene render. So when we do this, we're going to need the render group, obviously, because the render group's the thing that allows us to actually push stuff on there. We're going to need stuff like the transient state, like the asset, like the game assets, right? So we're going to need stuff like that. And then what we're going to have to do is when we get in there, we're going to have to do things like setting up what we expect our lens to be, right? Like how we expect to view stuff. And we're going to have to set up, we're going to have to make draw calls to basically like get assets we want, like this sort of thing here, right? We're going to have to do something like that. And we're going to have to actually push it to the renderer, right? So I'm just grabbing the code that we have, like so. This is really all the sorts of stuff that we're going to be needing to do. So let's take a look at what we've got here. When we pass through the render group here, we need the draw buffer to know what the width and height is, right, of the draw buffer stuff. So I need one more thing, which is just the draw buffer. I believe that's a bitmap, right? Yeah, that's what I thought. Like so. And so what we're going to do here is say, all right, let's set all this stuff up. We've got meters to pixels, and I don't know what we want to do with meters to pixels here. This is a little bit weird. I feel like we've always kind of danced around that a little bit. And it's just kind of a little bit janky, right? You can kind of see like this stuff is kind of a little bit weird. The way that it works, and I don't super love it. So I think we may put it to do in here and say, like, you know, unify this stuff, because I feel like we kind of need to unify it with this and you know, just kind of like figure out exactly how we wanted that to be treated, right? But anyway, in here, once we've got this stuff set up, and we can play with this a little bit later, like I said, remember this is the code we just said, like, okay, how big is the monitor in meters? How big is our draw buffer width? Okay, that's how big that's going to be in terms of how big a meter should be on the screen or whatever it is, right? That sort of stuff. And that's really kind of just going to be fixed based on our preferences and our testing, right? But anyway, so taking a look at this stuff, what we have to do now is go, all right, we want to load these things out, and you can see we've got, you know, our match vector, weight vector. If you remember how these things work, we just say, all right, I want to pull something out of the asset system. I give it a vector that kind of describes what's going on, and it just does a best case match. Again, we probably have some work to do on that sort of thing in the future, but for now it's going to be totally fine. The work we have to do in the future is basically to accelerate these things. We'll probably have to compress the asset vector because as we get more tags, but that's a separate issue. So anyway, if we have an asset vector system here, I'm going to want to be drawing a bunch of these, right? So I'm just going to make a for I loop here where we just go through and we grab out layers sequentially and we put them on the screen, right? And so we can see exactly how we would do this, right? We got to create our match vector and our thing. We've got, for our match vector and a weight vector, we have our shot index and our layer index are the two things that we're going to want to do. And that's just literally going to be something like this, right? Where we set them. And then our weight vector is, again, going to be the exact same thing. We just want to look at those two things evenly. We'd like to get them back. Exactly, and I assume we always want something from the right shot, right? So we're going to want that to obviously be heavily weighted, and then we want the layers. But really, we could leave this like this because we're only ever going to be asking for things that match exactly. We never need it to really, like, you know, find something else. But if we were really being honest about it, we could imagine doing something like this so that it wouldn't pick it. But it's really just stupid. Because we're never actually using the fuzzy matching capabilities of the system. We're always going to be asking for a very specific thing. All right, so if we imagine something in here, we're just going to say that we have a particular shot index, and that shot index, let's say, is 1, the very first shot. I decided to not call the first shot 0 because I figured shot 0 might indicate like the null shot, like if you were trying to say that we're not talking about a shot. So then from there, we've got layers, and what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to do layer index. I'm going to only just pull out just the very first layer, like the first layer of that shot, and we're going to render just that one, right? So we're going to do something that looks like this. We're going to say, okay, here's my bitmap ID or whatever it is. I'm going to say, give me the best match. Bitmap from the asset set. I want you to load the opening cutscene that matches this weight vector, right? And I'm going to move this guy in here as well, so we update it every time, right? We could probably do something like that. And then I'm going to draw it, right? And I'm just going to draw it right in the center of the screen. Nothing particularly fancy there. I'm just going to literally draw it, you know, layer image, like so. That's all I'm going to do. So that's my render cutscene call. When I compile, remember, this file is not actually being compiled yet, so I have to add it to the build. Remember, this is a single translation unit build, so I can literally do that by just coming in here and saying, all right, handmade cutscene.cpp is now smushed directly into my main file, and now it's being compiled. And hey, we didn't have any compile errors. Look at us, syntax masters. But we're not actually calling this yet, so if I ran the code as you would expect, it doesn't actually do anything. So if I wanted to do something, I would have to go in here and actually render the cutscene. Now what I can do is say, all right, you can go ahead and render all the stuff under the cutscene all you want. And then I'll just render this thing on top of it. But since the cutscene is going to be pretty heavy hitting for our render system because there's lots of stuff layered on top of each other, I don't really want the renderer to have to spend time rendering other stuff. So I think I'm going to do at this point is start to sort of bifurcate this code a little bit and put the other stuff into a separate piece of code, right? So I'm just going to say, all right, as we do this stuff, where we have like this allocate render group and we do the begin renderer, that sort of stuff, I'm just going to come in here and say, all right, here's render cutscene. We'll go ahead and put render cutscene in here like this. And then this stuff is going to be something else, right? I'm going to take all this stuff, I'm going to make this be something else entirely. So all of the stuff that happens here, everything right up until the point where we actually flush the render system, right? Which would basically be like right here. Why do we render before we flush the sim region? Does anyone know why we're doing that? I don't know why we're doing that, but okay. That's a bit weird, and I'm going to change that right now because that doesn't make any sense. All right, so point being, that's just weird, and I'm going to figure out why we did that. Maybe there was a very good reason for it. I don't know if there was or not, but we're going to find out in a second because I don't think that should be happening. But maybe there's a reason for that that has to do with like how things were ordered, or I don't even know. So I guess we'll find out. We'll find out in a minute. Probably should have put a comment in there that was like, hey, warning, don't move this, if in fact it actually needed to be moved. Or rather, couldn't be moved. But since I didn't, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And we'll find out later. All right, so I'm going to just go ahead and get that working. And we're going to call this, render game or something like that, right? And we're going to see what it needs. So it needs the game state. And it probably needs the trans state as well. And we'll see if that's enough. It needs the world. The world, I think, is just game state world. Yeah, it is. So it doesn't really need to get that passed to it for the most part, right? I can just make that be something that it grabs out of what it gets. Let's see what else it needs. Input. So it needs some input. That would be, let's see, render game. This would be actually update and render game, for being honest with ourselves. So this is game input. Is it not called game input? I think it is. Right? Yeah. And mouse P is something that can just be gotten from the game input, if I remember correctly, right? Yeah. So that actually can just be moved yeah. I'm just going to go ahead and move that up because nobody else needs it. So again, really all I'm doing is just pulling this code out because it really was our game, our render game, and we just kind of left it in there because we could, and so we did. All right, so render memory is an undeclared identifier. That makes sense because that was something that we actually did out here. And so hopefully that all lines up now properly. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to see if that works. Let's take out, so we're not actually doing the cutscene now. I'm just going to do render game, or rather update and render game. So I'm just going to call that now and see if we still have our game, right? I'm just going to make sure that I extracted that code properly and didn't mess something up when I pulled it out, because you never do know. Things are getting fairly complicated in here. As we get more and more of our engine stuff together, you end up with a situation where you could easily break something that you hadn't really thought too hard about before, right? All right, so there we go. So this is just as we're cleaning up our temporary memory stuff. So it looks like what happened here is, again, because as we sort of end our memory stuff, I feel like Where does the memory stuff actually happen? If that should happen before checking the arena. So that actually should happen here, right? Because what happens is, where do we get our temporary render memory? We get it right here. So we get the temporary memory for the renderer here, which kind of pushes that onto that sort of stack of temporary memory. We do a bunch of stuff, and then we end our temporary memory here for it. Inside update game and render, it's gonna get sim memory and then release the sim memory. So I feel like that should have been worked because they are nested properly, but I don't actually know. Yeah, so that was just because these check arena calls need to come after the temporary memory stuff had happened, and we hadn't done that, so that was incorrect. So there we go. So now if I want to switch from a game to our cutscene, I should be able to just do that, right? And now if I run this code, in theory, I should be in that cutscene rendering code. And so now we can start working on the cutscene rendering code, and the goal is to get, like, you know, a little bit of a cutscene on a scene here, on the screen here, and we've got 30 minutes to do it. So hopefully that won't be too terribly difficult, but who knows, right? All right, so let's see. The first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we're actually getting back a bitmap here, that we're actually able to load, you know, something that we can draw, right? So what I want to do is I want to step into the code, and I want to see, I want to make sure that in render cutscene that we're actually getting back a bitmap that we could actually draw, right? So let's see what that comes back as, 251. So that is an actual bitmap, and then in here we're going to go ahead and push that bitmap on, so hopefully it'll be able to actually do that. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to step to it here. So in theory, if we come through here, we should be able to go, if it stops showing me a bunch of constructors for things, we should be able to draw that bitmap, and let's see what we get. Okay, so there's that height. Oh, well, probably won't see anything if I pass a height of 0. I probably need to pass the height that I actually want this thing to be. For the moment, we'll just pass 10, which is just an arbitrary height I made up. Hey, look, it's our bitmap. I gotta, of course, make the screen large enough to see it. So there is just a layer. Again, doesn't really make any sense because we're only seeing one of them. And I don't really know how big I want it, but of course, thanks to the Loop live code editing, we actually don't even really need to make much in the way of tools for this, creating this cutscene, because I can just sort of, you know, go ahead and do something like this, where I just create, or not. What did I do wrong there? I just changed the height. Strings are equal broke there. Interesting. So it looks like we have a looks like we have a bug in our debug stuff, which is not surprising because we weren't done with it with our live code editing stuff. So that's actually fine because I don't care about it at the moment. So since we were in the middle of that, I'm just going to leave that for now and go ahead and turn off Handmade internal so that we can continue what we were doing. So there we go. All right. So back to what I was saying. Here is our thing. I want to just make it get sort of a little bit bigger. I want it to kind of take up a little bit more of the screen, if that makes sense, so that it kind of, that back layer kind of occupies the entire space, if that makes sense, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, let's say that's just 14 units high here, and I'm just adjusting the layer till it fits, right? So that looks pretty good. So maybe now I'll just say, like, okay, let's see what happens if we load 2 layers and composite them on top of each other. There we go. There's a little light there. I'm going to add 3 layers and composite them on top. And that's like too big. So that layer clearly needs to be like sized and placed a little bit differently. But I can keep going like this until I get all the layers of this shot on there. And you'll notice that this first shot is the familiar one that you've seen many times before. I think there's only 8 layers in it. Like there's no, I don't think there's any layers past that one. Yeah, so that's all the layers in it. You can see it's kind of more finished now, like Yangshan did some polishing on it. It's a little more detailed than the one that we use for the backdrop and that sort of stuff. But we have all of those layers on there, and that's all well and good, right? So hopefully you understood all that. We didn't do anything particularly interesting. All we're doing is taking these and rendering them through our renderer. And yeah, and that's about it. What I would like to do now is start to work on that sort of, again, placement and movement, that sort of basic stuff that we want to do with a cutscene. Okay. So let me see. That went a lot faster. I was kind of expecting that to be what we did today, but that's already on the screen, so I can't really be that what we did today because we got 30 minutes of me sitting around going, that's what we did today. That's not very interesting. So I'm going to jump right into the discussion of exactly what's going on with that particular sort of cutscene situation. So like I said, this is what we've got here, right? We've got a cutscene, and as you can see, it's got layers 1 through layer 8, right? So essentially, we've got something that looks like this, right? 2, 3, 4, and so on, all the way up to number 8. And they're all getting composited together. I don't know what our frame rate is right now, actually, but we could kind of test that by having a thing that allows us to kind of move it around a little bit. Or I guess if I went and fixed the bug in the debug system, I could see what the frame rate was, but I don't really care at the moment. So I think our renderer might actually handle this many layers, which is kind of crazy, but that's just the way it goes sometimes, computers, because they're so darn fast. But point being, this is what we're trying to put together. Now, each of these layers is something that we want to sort of position in space, right? Because what we're trying to do with this is simulate the fact that we have some sort of perspective in our scene. Now, we talked about this a bunch. We talked about this before when we did our sort of stuff where the hero kind of goes up a level and we wanted to kind of zoom in and out. But just to recap what's going on here, right? We have looking from the top down now, right? This is the monitor right here, and here's our eyeball, right? There's our little eyeball looking at it. What we want to see is we want to see that things in the background, so layers that are back here and layers that are in the front here, we want to simulate that perspective foreshortening effect where layers that are in the background, as we might move, so if we move forwards, we want layers here to become bigger at a rate that's faster than layers that come here. And we've already built that into our system by having z-depths, right? So what I want to do is I want to make the z-depths, I want to be able to change these z-depths that we have so that each individual layer has a different z-depth, and so that when we pan or zoom the camera in and out, we get different perspective effects, right? So the first thing I need to do there is I need to create some notion of a camera movement that will happen over time, okay? And so what I'm going to do that, right, you know, I just need some space to store it. Again, I don't care where that is right now, but as we sort of think about these cutscenes a little more, we're going to kind of pull that out into a little bit more of a concrete notion of what's happening. But what I can do for the moment is just say, okay, we've got a game state here. So all I'm going to do is introduce something temporarily down at the bottom, which is like cutscene time. And that's going to be a timer that we can drive our cutscene time from, right? And so in here, what I will do is say, like, maybe when we do this render cutscene, maybe I'll just pass that in, right? So we'll say what the cutscene time is. And what I'd like to do is say wherever that camera is, like when we're doing this sort of thing, that distance above ground, I'm just going to slowly zoom the camera so that it gets less than 9 away, right? So that the 0 plane is 9 away. I don't know why we picked 9. That was just what we had before. I'm going to say that, you know, maybe we'll even just call it 10 for now because who cares? We're just going to set all this up based on that initial number anyway. It doesn't matter what you set it to. You can set it to anything. I'm just going to make it so we zoom between two numbers, right? So as this cutscene time goes, and this cutscene time is obviously in seconds, we're always using seconds for our time. So as our cutscene time goes up, what I'd like to do is I'd like to smoothly vary the distance above the ground based on that cutscene time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce two boundary variables for this particular thing, which is like cutscene start, right? And that's going to be 0, 0, and cutscene end. And I'm going to say that that's like over, you know, 5 seconds or something. I'm just picking a number randomly here. And then I'm going to map this cutscene time into that range. And so I believe we also already have a routine we wrote that maps things into a range. You can see it here, clamp 0, 1 map to range. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take that and I'm going to produce that clamped t-value. Now remember what this does. You can pass it in a minimum bound and a maximum bound, like so. And then you pass in what the actual value is that you're looking at, which is our cutscene time, like so. Oops, that should be capitalized perhaps. We'll just put in here, thank you to Ron Gilbert and friends for introducing the word cutscene into the game development vocabulary. Since he was at Handmade Con, I think it's only right to give him and his team credit for introducing that term. As he said at the conference, he was not the first person to do an interstitial in a game, but they were the people who coined the term cutscene. So there you go. All right, so here we go as cutscene goes. Basically what we're going to do here is we're going to take that time, we're going to map it into our range. So now we're going to have here, this is like our normalized t. We now have a time value, right? And now, you know what, I should probably be consistent here. Let's just call that t cutscene, t start, t end. I don't know, kind of like that for some reason. So let's just do it like that. And now we have a value that ranges from 0 to 1 that tells us where we are in our cutscene. And so our distance above ground could just be like whatever. It's 10 meters away minus, you know, it goes, you know, 5 meters forwards over the course of the zoom, right? So as this goes up, that will happen. For now, I would like to kind of mod the value so that it wraps around. We don't really have a good way to do that, but I could do something like, right here. Do we have modulus? I don't know that we do. I don't think we do. Intrinsic modulus. We do not have an fmod. It would appear, at least as far as I could tell. Yeah, I'm not seeing it. Not seeing it. So, you know, that's just the way it goes sometimes, babe. So yeah, so I don't know what to do exactly there. Maybe we'll do something like this so we can wrap the cutscene number. I don't actually think we need to do that. Let's just ignore this for now. Let's pretend it never happened. Doesn't really matter. Point being, that will give us that zoom over time. So all we have to do now is go ahead and actually use these values. So when we do render cutscene, we can pass it game state, cutscene time, like so. And then we can just update the cutscene time with however much elapsed, right? So I'm just running a simple timer, and I'm just advancing the cutscene as we go. I don't know where we compute. There it is. So I don't know where we have that value, but there we go. And what I want to do is say if game state t cutscene is greater than 5.0 for now, I'm just going to wrap it round back to 0 so that we can just basically loop the zoom. And so if we tab back to the game, you can see what I'm talking about here. So here's us just kind of, and our renderer is holding up remarkably well here. I can't believe that software rendering a bunch of stacked stuff on top of each other with absolutely no, and it's doing the bilinear scaling and everything. It's not 60 frames a second here, but then again, we're not compiling and release. Kind of interesting to know. I'm sorry, it always blows my mind how fast computers are these days. I just want to know, what are we in release? So if I O2 this. Oh, I guess we already build that part in release, so we won't really get any faster. So never mind. So that's like as fast as we're going to go with those things stacked on top of each other without additional optimizations, of which there are many we could do. But anyway, there you go. So we're going to go ahead and sort of fuss with that. So what I wanted to point out is that, as you can see, when we zoom in now, since all of our layers are at the same z depth, we get absolutely no depth. This image has no depth at all, right? There's no there's no feel to it, right? And so as a result, you know, the layering effect is totally useless. There is no point in having these layers because as we move, they don't slide relative to each other. So what we want to do is we want to start positioning these layers at different z depths so that way they'll be able to get some of that parallax effect, right? And so if I remember correctly, the way that we have to do that, because our render system is kind of a little weird, I still don't love where we ended on how we do those transforms. And this was because of the 2.5D thing. The 2.5D thing is always, it's never fabulous, right? But we have that transform thing, and the way that I believe happens is, transform offset P, right? So what we need to do is every time we set that transform offset P, we can sort of set where we want things to be placed, right? And so if we do something like this, you could imagine placing each thing further back in Z like, negative layer index. So each layer gets a little bit further back from where it was. Does that make sense? In fact, I should probably do something like this, times R32, like that. And so that's just going to do that sort of offsetting. And now what you can see, right, as I do that, is you can kind of see that all of the layers are scaled. Now, I did it the wrong way. You can see that the background layers are doing faster. And the reason for that is layer index 1 is the furthest back layer. So I actually want to move them further back in Z. I want layer 1 to be the furthest back and layer 8 to be, the one that's closest. So actually what I should be doing is say, like, let's start at -10 or something and add with each layer index one thing forward. And so if I tab back now, now you can see that we're starting to get that parallax effect, right? Hopefully you can kind of sort of see what's happening there, right? So again, let's switch to sort of our loop live code editing mode here, so we can kind of just edit this on the fly and tune it a little bit to get it to where we want it to be. So let's start thinking about this problem a little bit more specifically here, right? And I don't know what's the best way. What I might do here is say, let's go ahead and do delete window like so, and let's just give myself just a little sort of bar to work with, maybe up at the top here, well, or maybe down at the bottom, because we don't really need to see that many lines of code. Let's see, there we go. So that's probably okay for now. Oops, thank you, Windows, for adjusting my window in a way that I totally did not want. Okay, so you can see that I can kind of exaggerate this effect quite a bit if I want to, by really like exaggerating that depth, right? And I don't want that. Go away. Oops, forgot. That's got to be, this would have to be more like that in order to do that. So there's more exaggeration of the depth. I really wish it would not do that, Emacs. Why do you think I want to see that? Why? I don't care. You know what? We're going to put that right over there. Okay. Okay, so let's try that one more time. Here we go. So you can kind of see how we can kind of stratify these out even more so than we are, right? I can keep going with that, and you can kind of see we can get some pretty ridiculous effects in terms of how we sort of stagger this, and the further we go back, the more sort of parallaxy you get there. Now the problem is, as you go further back, the things get smaller and so on. None of these things are modeled to scale. So what I hope you can tell, if we want to sort of put this cutscene together a little more appropriately, is we're going to have to start specifying for each individual layer where we want it placed, how big we want it, and what Z we want it at, right? So that's the first thing that we're going to do, is we're going to break this out into something that's a little more prescriptive about how things are supposed to be placed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's say that we've got a vector 3, which is layer placement, right? And I might even make it a vector 4 for now, which is basically like, the x, y, z, and then the height, right? The scaling factor for it. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do that for each of our layers, right? So here they are, like so. And we're just going to say, like, okay, they're placed at 0, 0, 0, and scaled at, what were we doing the scale right now? 14, right? This would be what we would do, each one of these. I don't remember. We should have probably noted what each of these was, like so. Oops. So we probably should note what each of these was, and I guess I could do that right now if I wanted to, but we can do that in a second. So anyway, here's the X, Y, Z, and we've got like, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, layer 5, layer 6, layer 7, layer 8. You don't need that one right there. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that layer placement. Every time we go through here, I'm going to say, like, okay, the placement for this layer is just going to be whatever it says in that table, like so. And for each one of these, I can say, okay, so wherever we're going to place this guy, we're just going to place it at, wherever this says to place it, those X, Y, and Z. And the height of it's going to be whatever it says its height is, right? That's it. That's what we're going to do. So now everything's got the same placement. Our parallax is gone. I'm going to revert to just looking at a single layer. So there's that single layer, right? And it's not doing anything in particular, right? All makes sense. So this one is kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, this is our sky background or something like that, right? And what I'm going to do with the sky background is something specific. I want the sky background not to move at all. Because as you know, if you move forwards, the sky is so far away that it's not going to zoom. No matter how far you walk towards the sky, any realistic amount of human motion, unless you're in a rocket ship, is not going to make the sky get any bigger. It's infinitely far away for all intents and purposes. So what I want to do is for the sky background, I want to cheat. I want to say that no matter what we set the distance of the camera to, it's going to be that far away as well, right? So whatever the distance above ground is, it's going to be that. So now it won't move in theory at all, I hope, right? At least that's my goal. Although that doesn't seem to have worked in any way. So I take it back. That compiled, right? Overwrite. Yeah, that compiled just fine. Oh, whoops. Did I forget to take out, by the way? No. I didn't. Did I? Yeah, it's all fine. That's all good. All right, so I want this proportional distance above ground. So we're going to do the minus... Oh, well, obviously, duh. So what I actually need to do is I need to take this part, the t-normal part, right? And I need to make sure that I just subtract that t-normal part away. But that, I still feel like that should have worked. I feel like if we move... I feel like that should have been... Oh, pfft. I put it in the wrong... I put it in the wrong slot. That's the size. That's the z. Why am I so dumb? I don't know why I'm so dumb. I guess I just am. All right, but it still doesn't work, so I'm not that dumb. I mean, I am dumber. Maybe that even means I'm even dumber than I thought I was at the beginning. But point being, I feel like if I move this away at the same rate that the camera's moving, it should stay fixed. So I don't really know why it's not, and that's kind of bothering me a little bit. Like, I don't get it. Does that make sense? Like, why are we not seeing... I know why. That's the 0th entry, not the first. Yeah, so I should do that, right? That's better. Hey, look, it did what I expected when I actually looked up the actual value. Shocking, isn't it? So I should be able to do distance above ground here. And when I do distance above ground here, that means it's going to be placed. I don't know why this is complaining. There we go. So if I do distance above ground here, now I should get it so that I should be able to basically adjust this guy's settings and change where he's at. Of course, distance above ground means that it's where the camera is, so I need to actually place it, right? This means I'm literally sitting right on the camera, which is not a particularly good thing. So I need to place it back from the camera at least a bit, right? So I'm going to place it 100 meters back, let's say. I don't know why I'm placing it there, but I just am. And we'll sort of play with these as we go. And then I'm going to scale it up till it encompasses the whole screen, right? However big that would be. So there we go. Maybe make it a little bit bigger so it encompasses the whole screen. Almost there. Is it like 120 maybe? So it's going to be maybe 140 to encompass the whole screen. A little bit more. Still not quite there. Okay, so now that's not moving anywhere. That one's fixed. So now we can move on to the second layer. And what's the second layer? That's like this weird little skylight thing, right? This is kind of just a little light that Yangshin wanted in the sky that was just kind of supposed to be there. And so this shouldn't really move very much at all. So this should also be pretty far back, I would think. But it should move maybe a little bit, right? Just a little bit. And so if I go ahead and make this roughly the same scale as the thing, like that, you can see it kind of just moved just a little bit. That's probably fine. So this is weird skylight, right? So now I'm going to turn on layer 3, like so. And layer 3 is way too big right now, and probably needs to be moved back quite a bit as well. So I'm going to move that back quite a ways, somewhere like there. You can see that looks like the sky is maybe moving a little bit too much. So I might actually also kind of maybe dump those guys even more into the background, because that does look maybe sort of right with how much the ground one should be doing. So I'm going to go ahead and just move these back a little bit here as well, and then resize them, right? So I'm going to go ahead and make that bigger, like so. Is that the right size? I don't actually know. Oops. Yeah, so that is about the right size. 300, 300. There we go. And so now that's moving, because I want there to be a pretty big difference between those two in terms of movement, and that's good. That row of trees is obviously, you know, a little bit small, so I'm going to go ahead and just make that a little larger. There it is. That looks pretty good, but it's probably placed a little bit oddly. It should probably be sort of I don't know, it should probably be maybe a little lower or higher. I'm not entirely certain. So, you know, I guess what I'm saying is it probably should be moved like up or something like that. I'm not super certain. So we'll see as I go forwards how we want to place that in terms of X and Y. All right, so here is adding another layer on top there. This one, again, obviously needs to be moved back quite a bit. So I'm going to move it back into sort of that background. And this is, I guess I should name these as well. This is the first row of trees, or the backmost row. This is like hills and trees, right? Like so. And okay, so I moved it back there. Gonna have to scale it up a bit again. So here we go. That's still probably not the size that it should be, and it looks like that wouldn't have very much parallax. I might drop that guy back a bit, just a little bit there, so that there's a little bit more between them. You can kind of see that parallax starting to kick in there. So that's pretty nice. Just go ahead and start to pull these together a little bit more. Just get that up a bit. So you can kind of see how the parallax is starting to come together there. Again, this guy looks a little bit too low, so maybe we're going to have to move him up a little bit as well to sort of fill in those cracks. Why did that not move up a bit? It should have. Is it just me, or did that not move up at all? What's going on? What's going on here? It's compiling, but it's not moving up. Oh, because I'm editing the wrong one. Nice. Fantastic. Not the brightest bulb on the tree sometimes, guys. Not the brightest bulb on the tree. All right, so moving that up. Let's see here. Going up to 10. And maybe move this guy back down. I don't know. Does that look more right to you? We'll see. Again, getting that vertical position right is probably going to take a while. We're probably going to have to get a little bit higher up in the layers. Thank you for the 5-minute warning there. All right, so this guy, again, probably going to have to be, you know, more like this or so, right? Like something more like that. I don't actually know how parallaxy we want it to be, so it's a little bit hard to guess sometimes. But there we go. So you can really start to see that parallax effect coming into play, right? You can sort of, hopefully you guys can kind of see how that's feeling now. You know, as it kind of does that sort of slow pan in. All right. So yeah, that's looking pretty good so far. I kind of want to see just what that looks like in general. Yeah, you can kind of see the parallax working relatively well. So let's go ahead and add those last ones in here. This is hills and trees 2. Front hills and trees. So let's get layer 6 in there. That's like on the side. I also don't know, is this guy a little too scaled right now? Not actually sure. Yeah, it looks like he is a little bit too scaled. So probably should have been more like that. I don't know if this guy should be more like this as well. Possibly. Hard to say. Nope, you can still see the edges of that guy, so that probably should be more like that. Yeah. So all right, let's move this down a bit. So that's probably about right scale-wise. Yep. And then this guy, I don't know where this guy is. Let's say he's at -30 maybe. Oops, not -3. -30 I said. And then he should also be quite large. And he's also kind of off to the right side. You can see he's kind of a right side only sort of piece. I don't know how big he's supposed to be, to be completely honest with you. I'm not really sure how it's intended, but this is like right side tree and fence. So I'm going to move him over like 100 units, or not. Let's try 10 units. Let's try 30. That looks more right to me. I feel like he should be moving quite a bit faster based on where he is. I wonder if maybe that would be a little bit better. Possibly. Again, it's really hard to say sometimes with some of these things. it's really very like, you know, kind of tuned to your preference. All right, and so let's just kind of finish up. We got number 7, which is our orphanage, right? And we'll put that back at -20, and then we'll just scale it up to roughly how we think it should be, maybe 30, so 35. It's a little too small at the start, so I guess it's got to be more like 40. Right? Looking pretty good. And now we just need one more layer, and then we're done. So there's our frontmost layer, and we got to scale that one up to its normal size, whatever that's going to be, probably about 30. Although that one looks like it's really close, so that might be more like -5, like so. So it looks like we need to move our orphanage down a little bit, I would say, just a bit from where it is. So I'm going to go ahead and just drop that guy by 10 units or so. Oops, that's too much. That looks about good to me. Right? Looking pretty good there. And so now we just got to finish up this guy, which needs to move over a little bit, I think. Maybe 1 unit, maybe 2. And probably down a little bit. So maybe maybe something like -2 units down. Let's see here. And he maybe needs to be just a little bit bigger. All right. Okay, and so now the only problem that we have left, and I'll go to the Q&A in just a second here. The only problem that we have left now is, as you can kind of see, we're zooming towards nothing. Now, you know, as game developers, as programmers, maybe you're not supposed to be experts in cinematography, and that's fine, but hopefully you would at least notice something a little bit peculiar here, which is to say that we probably should be zooming towards the action, which is going to be the orphanage, not the distance, and we're kind of zooming into nothing here. So what I'd like to do, in addition, just really quickly, is go up here and add some code so that instead of just distance above ground here, when we actually do the camera stuff, we can sort of offset these guys as well. And so there can be sort of a little like vector 3, sort of like a v3, like, you know, camera offset thing, something like this. Yeah, and so when we do that camera offset, we can sort of do an XY as well. So our T normal can go like V camera start, V camera end, you know, sort of thing. And then our camera offset can be, you know, camera start. I don't know if we do linear blend. I think we do, where we do camera start, whatever that T normal is, and camera end, like this. Hopefully that'll work. We don't have linear blend yet. Yes, we do. Linear blend, or blend. Linear. How do we I know we have, come on, folks. I know we've written this before. There's no way. There's just no way. Seriously? LERP, that's what we called it. I don't love that term. I don't know why I used that, but I guess must have had a reason. All right, so if we have camera offset here, what I can do is just say, okay, whatever the placement XYZ is, we could just subtract the camera placement from that, and that effectively offsets everything by wherever the camera actually is, right? It's basically just moving the camera is moving everything by the same as what the camera is going to move by, right? So if I want to do that, I can set the camera start to be 0, 0, 0, which is the sort of the starting alignment of everything. But then when we move the camera forwards, I can move it kind of down and to the left or something like that. So I can do something like moving it 1 unit in each direction, right, like that. And so now, in theory, when we do that, I should be able to do something where the camera kind of we could essentially pick the focus point by moving the camera as we go. So I'm going to move this up to the top here so you can kind of see now we're starting to focus a little bit more on the action, which is what we want to do, right? We want to kind of focus on the important parts of the image. So I'm just going to tune that to the part where it's relatively plausible that that might be what we're trying to look at. And I happen to know, because I've seen the rest of the cutscene art, obviously, that we're trying to zoom in sort of towards those windows over there on the side. And so we're looking at something a little bit more like this. And so if you take a look at this scene now, I'm pretty delighted with that. That looks pretty darn cool, right? And so, you know, we probably want to tune this a little bit more, but for one day's worth of putting cutscene stuff together, that's pretty nice. It's looking pretty good, and I think we're pretty happy with that, right? So yeah, so that's where we're at, and we'll tweak it a little bit tomorrow. So let's go ahead and go to the Q&A, I don't have HexChat anymore. I had to format the laptop for Handmade Con that was using that. So let's go ahead and go to the Q&A. I don't know if I can do this here from this one. Yeah, there we go. So let's see. All right, folks, if you have any questions about the programming here, please feel free to give it to me with a Q colon, so to speak. Let's see. Elephant, would you normally want to get the position scale for each layer from the artist? If so, how would you go about doing that? That depends on whether or not the artist is familiar with any particular tool that allows them to set up a scene like this. A lot of artists, if they're just straight illustrators, aren't. They don't know how to use, like, say, After Effects or stuff like that. And so they just know how to make stuff in Photoshop, right? And so if you're working with an artist like that, then the answer is no. There isn't any real way to do it because they don't know how to set up or preview this. And so you just kind of have to work with them where you set it up. And you could give them you could maybe make a little thing that they could use to tweak those values, right? Like put up a little UI so they could build it in the tool and not. If you are familiar with working, if your artist is familiar with that, like they normally work in you know, Flash or something like that, that allows them to set up something like that would be a move like this, then yeah, the way you would do that is whatever that tool is, you would have to write an importer for some data for that, right? And that's going to be entirely dependent on what tool they use, because there's really not much of a way in Photoshop to do it. If you really wanted to do it in Photoshop, you could have them set up two layer comps, one at the start of the zoom and one at the end, but that's really going to be hard for the artist because the artist in Photoshop won't have the Z positioning. Well, Photoshop does have some 3D utilities, so maybe you could do something there. I've never played with those, so I don't know. And it's not really meant to be an animation package, even though it does have some of that in it. So you probably could, if they happen to know in Photoshop how to do it, but a lot of artists aren't probably going to be familiar with those tools either. Stricken down. I am new to programming and know intermediate Java only. Can you explain what you use Emacs for if you're using Visual Studio? Yes, Visual Studio, we are only really using its debugger feature. That's all we're using. So we actually build and edit code outside of Visual Studio. So we use Emacs to edit the code, and we use a command line build. So we don't ever use Visual Studio really for anything other than just the debugging process, if that makes sense. I think you should move the skylight up a tad bit. You know, if you think the skylight should be moved up a bit, that's something you should do on your build of Handmade Hero, which you can tweak to your heart's content. I'm not really done tweaking this because I want to move the fence up and do a couple other things as well, but it's basically, you know, it's mostly there. Garlando Bloom, I feel like we should have some deep voice narration. Yes, that is coming, but that's kind of, you know, that's after we get our cutscene chops in place, and then we can worry about syncing it to voice acting. Did you ever have trouble while learning to program I'm currently getting my rump handed to me in Java class. Well, yeah, I mean, I never took a programming class, actually, in my life, because I learned to program when I was 7. So I never got my rump handed to me, per se. But as a child learning to program, yes, there was plenty of times when I just didn't know how to do stuff. And my dad was a programmer, and I'd have to call him in and be like, Dad, can you help me debug this thing? Because I'm too stupid. And so, yeah, absolutely. I can't relate to having trouble in a programming class because I never had one, but I can certainly relate to struggling with things because it does take a long time to become a good programmer, and there's a lot of things along the way that are stumbling blocks, and it takes time. It takes a lot of practice. A lot of practice. Will we ever load PNG files? If so, will we be writing our own loader or using STB image? I read that it's tricky to load PNGs, or no. No, we will never be loading PNGs. We load our HHA files. And so we strictly load HHA files. That is all we load. Will your cutscenes be coded like this or be separate as data in a separate file? They will be coded like this, because since we don't have any... There's no external tool for editing them that we have, there's no benefit to having them be in external files, since our game is currently our only preview tool. Let's see. Do you need to know in-depth linear algebra to do this? No. Well, I mean, you're not in depth, right? You don't need to know how to solve a matrix to do this, but you do need to know at least vector, basic vector stuff. Elvin, you mentioned your code base is mostly independent for the most part. Does that include random number generation, or do you use the C library for that? Yeah, my code base does not link to the C library. Full stop. My code base at work actually doesn't link to any library besides kernel 32. It's the only one. How do you handle 3D audio in your other engines and games? OpenAL, do you implement something yourself? I've never done 3D audio. It's not my kind of thing. I don't tend to really be interested that much in making 3D games myself, so I just never have to do that sort of thing. I tend to like games where the audio is more authored and it's not about like placing you being in an environment or anything. So I don't know, if I ever make a VR game, I'd probably worry about 3D audio, but that's just not the kind of game that I tend to be interested in. Oh, the skylight has a gap at the top, is what you were saying. We can kind of size that up a bit if you're worried about the gap. Or I guess, like, yeah, we can move it up or we can size it up. I'm not sure which would be better. Maybe move it a touch closer. Might also be kind of nice. Maybe like that, so it has a little more motion to it. Have you talked further with Pat Wyatt about coming on the stream, or is that postponed for when networking becomes relevant? I thought his talk was very interesting in particular. Yeah, I mean, we're definitely going to do something with that. So we will definitely be finding a way for Pat to do some streaming. I don't know how we're going to do it just yet, and it might not necessarily be in the context of Handmade Hero, because I don't know that Handmade Hero is really a networking kind of a thing. But, you know, we will figure something out. I just don't know what that will be, if that makes sense. Captain Craft, is this code going to be for a cinematic in the game, or are you just testing the functionality now? No, it's a cinematic in the game. This is like the first shot of the cinematic in the game, of the opening cutscene. Should I use uint32t over u32? You can use whatever you want. I prefer u32 these days. But if you want to use uint32t, that's totally cool. What do you think about adding lighting effects to the cutscene, like a flickering or pulsing of the candlelight in the welcome sign? Well, that's totally fine if you want to do it. That's not possible with the way that Yangshin authored these art pieces, if that makes sense. So there's no... The lights aren't painted separately, so they can't be modulated separately, if that makes sense. I mean, you could do a cheesy thing where you just kind of like, you know, masked out some things and kind of just flickered them that way, but it wouldn't probably be particularly compelling, if that makes sense. Elvin, I meant the image format before we pack them in the asset. I understand we're currently using BMP. So like I've said many times, asset preprocessing is not part of the stream. So that's just as the only point of that asset processor that we've got in there now was just to define the file format so that I could do stuff like what I did where I uploaded assets that are packed in the file format. So we will never touch that again. That's like, as far as we're concerned, we have HHA files, they follow our file format, we load from them, and that's it. Insofar as for adding more cutscenes or modding, wouldn't it make more sense to keep the parallax constants somewhere in the HHA file? I mean, it depends. It depends on what you want, right? I would say no, and the reason I'd say no is because if you want to support full modding, we would probably add support for DLL loading, right? In which case you can just add new cutscenes by providing the code that renders the cutscene, right? So I'd probably rather go that route so that the cutscenes could have like dynamism in them as well, or be launched at any time and stuff like that, rather than trying to make up our own art format for it. Because in general, in my opinion, art format stuff or like data stuff should only be for stuff we actually have an editor, like an external editor for. You know what I mean? Because we don't have an external editor, then there's no point in it. We could have just done it in code, right? Huber Caleb, don't you need to link to user32, GDI32, and OpenGL32 for a few things? You don't have to link to them, no. You can just dynamically load from them. The only thing you have to link to is kernel32, and technically you don't have to link to it so much as it's going to, you need to get its base address to start with, because without get proc address, which is in kernel32, you can't dynamically load anything, right? So you need kernel32, but there are tricks you could do to not actually link with it, but there's not a whole lot of point to that. Elvin, if you're writing OpenGL stuff, do you use glue or write your own extension loader and load the function pointers yourself? I have my own extension loader and I load the function pointers myself. Long Boolean, you could make a 2D VR game, just room with a giant video wall. Yeah, I suppose I could. And maybe someday I would. I have had thoughts like that before, believe me. Off topic, thank you for Handmade Con. I've watched it twice already. You're very welcome. I'm very glad you liked it. Purposely Drifting, not a question. Just wanted to thank you for doing Handmade Con, and glad to see you back doing Handmade Hero. Thank you as well. And in fact, several people are thanking for Handmade Con. Thank you all for coming and or watching. It was really kind of amazing how much of a turnout there was. It was pretty great. I had a great time at the event too, and I liked meeting everyone and seeing people at the like makeshift gatherings, the like ad hoc gatherings that we had afterwards were pretty great. So yeah. Let's see. Any plans for crude lighting and shadow support for things like light posts? Light posts. Yeah, I don't know what light posts mean. We are planning on doing lighting for in-game lighting. That's like the one major to-do left on our renderer, actually. Graga, will you show all content creation on stream too? Watching you spend hours doing cutscenes might not be fun. Yeah, so not to sound overly harsh, but this is not supposed to be fun. Making games is about doing work. And I have absolutely no interest in making the stream, quote unquote, fun. It's strictly supposed to be educational. And so part of it is we will absolutely do 100% of the code that ships in the game on the stream. And since the cutscene code ships in the game, we will be doing it on stream. And you are welcome to skip those episodes if you don't want. But yeah, I would say if watching me do it is not fun, then since I do it pretty quick compared to people who probably haven't programmed before, it's probably not going to be very good in terms of a prospective career, if that makes sense. Is that it for Q colons? Out of interest, if you wanted to implement a zoom that curved to the contours of the hill, forward, drop, forward, would you still look to implement that in code or look at a visual tool for something like that? Well, you know, visual tools are usually for when you know that the amount of time it takes you to do the work to support the visual tool or create the visual tool is going to be less than the amount of work it'll take you to make the cutscenes. We only have like 12 cutscenes in Handmade Hero, and they're all basically like this, like less. In fact, this is probably one of the more complicated shots. So it probably only take us a couple days to make all the cutscenes. So there's no point in doing anything more complicated. If you found that you started doing one like what you were talking about, and it was too complicated for you to do without a visual tool, and you're spending like days on it, and it's not coming together, then maybe you would want to think about, hey, is the right trade-off to do something to support like Flash or something so we can make it in there, or whatever you want, you know, Maya, who knows, whatever you want to use, or to make a little a tool myself to do it. You know, that's just a judgment call you have to make based on how long you see things taking and how much work you think it would be to make either an importer or a tool that would allow you to do that. Because if it takes you a week to write the importer, then if it only would have taken you a week to do the cutscenes, you haven't gained anything, right? So that's just you gotta figure that out, right? The Geek Pirate. Thanks for the stream, Casey. You are welcome, the Geek Pirate. Did you have to study algorithms in depth, or did you learn from on-hand experience? I'm not sure what that means. I did study algorithms, but it was usually while I'm programming. I mean, I did have an algorithm. I've read algorithms books before, and I read through algorithms that I'm not necessarily using right at the moment. But I also do a lot of practice with things, and you know, like, I'm also weaker in areas of things I don't use. For example, sorting, I hardly ever use, so I'm not that good at writing sorts, for example. Because I almost never write them. So it's like just, even though I kind of know what they are, they're less second nature to me than something like linked lists or arrays, hash tables that I use all the time. You know, or any of the 3D math stuff. Even like texture sampling and stuff like that is just stuff I write so often that those are much more second nature to me than some of the classic data structured algorithms, like you know, sorted trees or sorting. I just don't write them that often. Graga, is VSync part of the renderer? At least on my end of the stream, there is quite a bit of tearing. Not sure if that's stream or not. So no, we don't VSync right now, and the reason for that is because on the on Windows platform, what we're doing right now is we literally just blit our bitmap to the screen. we don't go through the 3D hardware path yet. The 3D hardware path will do the VSync automatically for us, and so when we switch, if that makes sense, if we switch to going through the 3D pipeline, which we will somewhere down the road, then we'll just have the VSync. But our current renderer doesn't do any attempts to VSync at all. It literally just copies the buffer to the screen at that time. That said, on the VSync you are seeing is on your end. And the reason that I know that is because since we're going through StretchBlit, that's actually going through Windows Aero, which is actually compositing on the VSync. And so, for example, on my screen, there is no tearing. So I believe the tearing that you're seeing is actually on your end, but we are also not actually doing anything to try and guarantee VSync on our end, I believe. But I could be wrong about that. I don't know. I'm trying to think if Aero always does that or not. But like just looking at it on mine, there is no VSync tearing. There's no tearing on my screen, for example. So if you're seeing it, you're probably seeing tearing on your video playback. Captain Craft, have any of the responses to your questions at HandmadeCon affected your approach to certain problems? I don't know, because I haven't really been working on anything that was related to stuff I asked. I was pretty interested in Tommy's approach to like doing everything by index in the art system. I don't know that that will change my approach to anything, but it definitely surprised me. It was not something I would have expected, and it was interesting, and it was like he had a very specific rationale for it too. It was like fairly well thought through, and so I found that interesting, and that would probably be something that I would remember. So I don't know that it will necessarily change any of my approaches, but was the snowman intentionally looking down to indicate a feeling of sadness, or am I reading too much into it? You would have to ask Yangshin. Because I do a lot of work art directing at Mali on our main game, I try not to really art direct Handmade Hero very much. So Yangshin really just kind of decides on her own what things are going to look like, and I only basically, like, for this I kind of just sketched out, like, here's what the shots are, and so on, and then she like does all of the detail, and unless there's something very specific, you know, I say like I need these sort of layers in it, and I need it it's going to kind of pan this way, and or it's going to have these elements, you know. But then I don't do stuff like actually do the art direction of like it should be, you know, this way or that way, or like the snowman needs to be sadder. I don't do that on this project because I feel like it would be just too much work, and so I try to let Yangshin just do what she wants to do. If there's something that I feel like really needs to be changed for some reason, I'll bring it up, but otherwise I don't micromanage that at all. Chuchism, has a programming problem ever stumped you, even after Googling and or collaboration? So I'm not sure I really understand the question, because programming isn't, like, I don't know that I've ever been stumped by a problem, because that suggests that there's like a solution to a programming problem. But there's no such thing as a solution to programming problems, right? There's only metrics. How fast it was, how memory efficient it was, how robust it was, how little code you could do it in, how well it integrated with something else. And pretty much almost all the time, I always either know or feel like I could do better than what I did if I wanted to spend more time studying the problem. So I don't think I've ever been stumped by a programming problem, but every code I write is something that I could see doing a better job on by devoting myself more fully to solving it as a problem, right? So So yeah, I guess you guys are saying to add that as a quote, but I guess, yeah. I mean, that just kind of seems obvious to me. I mean, I guess I don't feel like it really needs to be said. Like, in computer science, there are solutions to specific problems of the form like, you know, what is the worst case running time of a particular algorithm, right? Like, you can answer questions like that, and there is like a specific solution in the sense that there is only one right mathematical answer to that question. But in terms of actual, like, writing actual code that does stuff, there is no solution to it's there isn't even a problem. There's just, here is what the code needs to do. It's assumed that if you know how to program, you will get it to do that. So then the only question is, what are all of the metrics that you might measure how good that particular solution is, in a sense, right? So calling it a solution is almost wrong, and I feel like, you know, it's just our nomenclature that we say, oh, that solved the problem, or we were solution. What we really mean to say is we implemented it. It's an implementation. It's not a solution, it's an implementation. Any implementation solves the problem, or it's not actually an implementation, but each implementation has different characteristics we might measure. And by measuring those characteristics, we can compare the implementations and decide which one of them is the most appropriate or best given our criteria. Some implementations may be strictly better than others. Other implementations might be better than others in some ways and worse than others in some other ways, right? And then depending on what you wanted to do, you may pick one or the other as being a better implementation. When you were an intermediate programmer, how often is it that you use Google to help you look up solutions to hard problems? It's a funny question. It's amusing. When I was an intermediate programmer, Google had not been founded yet. Chrono Dragon, it may be obvious, but there is an entire class of programmers that seem to think otherwise. Well, that's unfortunate. But what are you going to do? Did you notice the Triforce in the windows? Oh! No, I didn't. Like I said, Yangshin kind of decides how that stuff goes. I did not notice there's a Triforce in the windows. I guess it's not quite a Triforce because the top one is not divided. In fact, neither is the middle one. But the two side ones, I guess, are Triforce. So it's not like a fully recursive Triforce, but yeah, I didn't notice that. Pseudonym 73. One of my mentors used to say that there should be a book called Algorithms, Data Structures, and Trade-Offs. That is a very good thing to say. Yes, I would totally agree with that. All right, I think we are done with the Q colons. So I'm going to wrap things up, close down the game, like so. Okay, save the drawing. Save the drawing, save the world. And there we go. Thank you everyone for joining me for another episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you as always. If you would like to follow along at home, and well, you'd have some downloading to do, but if you would like to follow along at home, you can always pre-order the game on handmadehero.org, and then you can go download the source code and the art pack, which you will need if you want to follow along with all of our cutscene work that we're going to do this week. If you would like to do that, go to handmadehero.org, pre-order the game, and it comes with all the source code and the art as we use it. So that's a good place to do that if you would like to follow along with the series. We also have a forum site, which you can go to ask questions. We have a Patreon page if you want to pledge to support the video series. It's always much appreciated. It's always free and released to everyone for free. We also have a tweet bot that tweets a schedule at you. And there's a little live button here, which if you go to the website anytime, it'll tell you, like, in fact, right now, it'll tell you the next time we're going to be live. So if that helps as well, you can do that. But the tweet bot's a good thing to subscribe to because it kind of helps you know what the schedule's going to be for the week if you want to catch it live. Speaking of the schedule for the week, I will be back here at 5 tomorrow for... probably throw a bunch of the more cutscenes in there. We should be able to get through like probably half the cutscenes tomorrow. Now that we've got kind of everything set up, we can just kind of do those all. Once we have them all done, we will look at how to assemble them into a full sequence and integrate that with the rest of our game. So that'll be pretty fun. Hope to see you here for that. That's 5 p.m. Tomorrow, Pacific Standard Time. Until then, folks, have fun programming, and I will see you guys on the internet. Take it easy, everyone.